All right. 1 second. I just need to make sure my sound isn't going to come back at me. Yeah, 1 second. All right, there we go. So, all right. So today we're going to be talking about the Catholic priest crisis. Is there actually a Catholic priest crisis, or do the numbers not pan out the way it is, and or the way to suggest that there actually is a Catholic priest crisis? This comes up because I saw some priests actually talk about this and suggest that there isn't a priest crisis, which is very odd to me that a priest would come out and say something like that. And so I am in the process of, like, this video is meant to show that yes, there is indeed a priest crisis, even if you're just going to look at the numbers. So I should mention out the person who said this, because context matters in this case. So the person who I saw say this was a secular priest, and that's very important. So a secular priest is, if you don't know, is someone who is not tied to a diocese and not necessarily tied to a religious order, but they'll do something that is what do you call it? Like, they'll focus on a more let's just say a mundane way of doing things. Like, you'll find a scientist, a priest that's a scientist and works as a scientist, but he's still a priest. So Father Lagrange with the Big Bang Theory is an example of a secular priest. That makes sense?
Sure.
Okay. Sure. Okay. All right. So that's really important to understand, because obviously context matters. Like, if a diocese, like a diocesan priest had said that, I think that would have been very weird, because and we'll go into the statistics here. And so I have with me John, Catholic fantasy guy. He's been on here a few times, and we're going to have a discussion about priests, our experience with priests that have been stretched too thin, and then also show you the appropriate statistics to support what we're saying. So before we get into the statistics, John, do you think, from your experience with priests, that you see a type of a shortage or a overworking of the priest?
Not as often here. So South Louisiana, we have a lot of priests, but we're a very, very Catholic area. And so in East Texas, I lived in East Texas for 4 years when I went to high school, and you could tell all the priests were like much, much older. Whereas, for instance, my wife and I had our anniversary dinner, and I went to a restaurant early to prepare everything because I got her flowers and so on. And there was a priest sitting at the bar meeting a friend in like a full cassock. Like, and that's not an abnormal sight here. Like, I'll probably see priests out in the wild, so to speak, like maybe like, that I don't know, that aren't associated with any diocese that I have, probably like maybe once a month. You'll just see a guy walking in a full cassock. The younger priests, it's more common for them to wear their full priestly wear, which I think is awesome. But yeah, outside of this very Catholic South Louisiana bubble, yeah, I mean, I've definitely noticed it. And I mean, even here, it's less than it was. But as far as my generation goes, I knew 4 priests personally, like from two from my own diocese that came up. So it's not bad everywhere, but anecdotally, no, I don't see a huge problem with it.
Right. And so, like, because that's the thing is, like, we'll throw statistics up there. Like, I'll throw statistics up there, and then people will cite anecdotes to say, like, oh, well, that's not actually the case over here.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, that doesn't actually undermine the statistics. That just means that the distribution isn't uniform, right?
In East Texas, there was nobody. Yeah. So it's definitely area by area, for sure.
Right. Because, like, up here, we'll have, so I'm in the Archdiocese of Detroit, but I used to live in Kalamazoo and Lansing. And the priest that was at our wedding like he's in charge of 2 parishes, and they're not small parishes. Like one is smaller than the other, but they're not like, he takes care of thousands of people. And there's other situations where like visiting priests will come in. Like, for example, I lived at a parish. I grew up in a parish in the or not the archdiocese, but the Diocese of Lansing. Actually, one of those parishes, we didn't get married at my parish, but he just so happens to be in charge of the parish I used to grow up in. And we would have a visiting priest every week. Like every week. We did not have a permanent priest. It was usually some priest from a different country that was visiting, and they were doing, they were doing mass, they were doing the sacraments. We actually had a religious sister that was in charge of the parish. And so but like that's like a very common thing. And it's not like the parish was small. Like, I mean, like didn't have anybody. Like if the parish was too small to be like justifiably supported by the diocese would be like, nope, you're going to have to go to this parish that's like right around the corner from you, and just group together. And it would have been easy, especially given the case that we didn't have a priest. So there was not a, there wasn't a pastoral, like, what do you call it? The priest being a pastor didn't come into play. So, and sometimes that comes into play. Like right now in the Archdiocese of Detroit, we're doing the family of parishes situation, which is basically a precursor to consolidation, where we're just going to be mixing a whole bunch of parishes together. And, I don't know what they're going to do with the buildings, but, we're going to be downsizing soon. But that's not to say that the lady isn't there. Right? Like it's, but the priests certainly aren't. Like there's not enough to do things. And again, this is anecdotal from our perspective. So I'm in Michigan, he's in Louisiana. And so like there's, and then you shared the Texas, East Texas.
Yeah. I mean, what I've noticed is it's like there's pockets, right? Like there was a guy I knew from Montana that they were like, we're graduating like, we've got 30 to 50 people in seminary at any given time. And it was like, some random parish. So I think it's wherever this is seen as important is where it flourishes. But one of the problems that I've seen, so I think I don't know if we want to get into like reasons why I think this happens. I think it's a multifaceted issue. I really don't like when people just go, well, it's because of, and then give one reason, and it's like, no,
there's certainly dozens. Multiple issues, but like multiple reasons. It's not just it's usually not just one. Like the problem is that a lot of our ways of doing, like a lot of our analysis in collecting data isn't going to be exhaustive in explaining that.
Sure. And
like that's the problem, is like that we do have ways of finding out, okay, why does certain tendencies happen, and we don't have the data. In fact, I'm working on a video that's going to be a video after the video after this, dealing with that, like when it comes to projecting like new priests in the future. So
well, yeah. Do you want to just get into the data first before we start talking? Because I can anecdotally.
No, absolutely, yeah. We'll definitely do that. I just wanted to bring up Hayes.
Yeah.
He's from Australia, and he's like, thank you for watching. And that is the case with us too. A lot of foreign priests come into America. In fact, like there's a whole subsection of the data set I'm going to show you has a whole subsection of foreign priests or foreign-born priests that are here.
Sure.
So let's see. Let's present.
Which while you're pulling that up, I'm going to say is not. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think there's a lot.
No, yeah.
That we could bring in from those cultures that would probably be very, very good.
No, but like the issue stems from the fact that, like, for the Archdiocese of Detroit, for example, like we have 1 million people that are supposedly Catholic, right? And so a million, I think it's like 1.1 million, and you get every year about 7 priests from that 1.1 million, like ordained,
Yeah.
or something like that. Sometimes the number's smaller, sometimes the number's bigger, but like it's not much bigger. And when you have a million people and you're like we definitely have a priest shortage.
Yeah, I want to say out of Lafayette, gosh, I want to say it's like Lafayette in the New Orleans area. It's like 30. I want to say we ordain like 30 a year.
Yeah, and how big's do you know how big the diocese is?
I mean, New Orleans and Lafayette is less than 1 million people. It's like maybe 500,000 altogether. So yeah, we probably have about 4 times as many priests coming out from a population half the size.
That's devastating. And the problem is like we don't have. It's not.
But it's not great either. I mean, like we have the previous generations that talk like everybody had a priest in the family, which I don't know that was like the best approach either. It was kind of like, well, Bob couldn't find a woman, so he just kind of got married. I'm sorry, he just kind of got went into priesthood instead of getting married. But yeah, no, it was anyway, go ahead and show us what you're looking at as far as the statistics go.
Yeah, so that is the wrong thing. So I checked to make sure that the poll, because I throw a poll up, so I check it. So if you go to YouTube, there's a poll, so you can vote on it. So I'm here at Cara, and so Cara is at Georgetown. It's where it's where a lot of analysis comes from for the United States, the USCCB. Sorry, I'm a bunch of acronyms in my head right now. But the Cara is like really good and top notch in terms of their analysis, and I use them a lot because it's reliable data. And so I just want to give a short comparison really quickly. So this is what I have been using, because this used to be what was up to date. And so now I will be using this. So there's some differences. They point out the pandemic, and then they add, instead of 2022, they have 2023 data. And so that's really important. And so right now we're going to look at ratios, because the ratio, even though it's not, you still have to take it with a grain of salt, because you're not given a standard deviation or a distribution, like what we were talking about, like how you're saying there are pockets. We have the capability to establish measurement for those pockets, but we don't have them available. Sure. And so we're not able to do like, okay, well, on average, a parish has 1.3 priests or something like that, give or take, 0.5 or something. So the two that I highlighted here, let's see if I can make this a little bigger. Holy crap. Let's hide these. Okay. So this is for the United States and the Virgin Islands. And so we have total priests here. And right now, the number is 34,092 total priests.
The Virgin Islands probably throw the whole thing off, dude. You got to throw out all these numbers.
What?
I'm being silly.
Oh, okay.
You're saying the United States and the Virgin Islands. It's like, dude, the Virgin Islands just blew your whole statistics.
Oh, well, whatever. So like the diocesan priests account for almost 24,000, 23.7, and then religious priests are 10,000. And so we're going to be primarily looking at total priests and diocesan priests, and I'll explain that later. And as we scroll down, we have Catholic population as self-identified from survey-based, which is 75 million. Now, previously, I used to use the directory, but study after study after study shows that this number from surveys is more accurate. And so what I mean by that is I'm looking at not just them, but I'll just get rid of this now because I don't need it. But when you look at Gallup, it says 22% of the population is Catholic, which is more in the 75 number. Here, 20% is Catholic, and it only gives adults here 52 million. And this is Pew, so that's Pew and Gallup, and so it corroborates with the 75 million, and I think that's what I'm going to go off of. Sure. In terms of the study. And then what else is there here? So we have Catholics who attend Mass every week, and then Catholics who attend Mass at least once a month, which would include the weekly or more frequent. Now, the reason why I'm looking at these two is for a variety of reasons. The first one is, okay, well, who's practicing the faith at the bare minimum? And when I say bare minimum, I mean from the standpoint of they're following the precepts of the church. One of the precepts of the church is that you go to every Mass on Sunday and holy days of obligation. So that is these people here. That's what that's doing. These people are people who attend at least once a month. So for whatever reason, whether it be work, so that would include those that go to work, right? Like if you're only able to once out of the month go to Mass because your work is putting you in a position where you can't do both, that like this captures that. In addition, I'm amazed
that number is as high as it is. That's almost 40%. That's pretty wild.
So, and just to clarify that, because I think that's a very important point, the Pew also found something similar. So they also found 38% attend Mass at least monthly. So I am being very careful with like using these statistics. I'm not simply going off one group. I am corroborating this with a lot of surveys to show you that this is a pattern and that this isn't simply me working off one study. Because if you're doing survey statistics, you do need to converge these statistics. You need to either give justification or show that this is a pattern that happens. I mean, it's technically justification, but you know what I mean. And so I agree with you. I am also surprised that number is at almost 40%. And so what does that leave us? So I think it's really important to compare what happened in 1970 to what happened in today. Like, so how we're understanding like priest ratios in 1970 to today. Why am I using 70 instead of 65? It's because that's when the first survey designation is there. There isn't one for 65, so I can't use it, and I want to compare apples to apples. So that's what I'm doing right now. And so when you look at this, so in 1970, for every priest, there was about 444 people that went weekly. And the percentage for those that went weekly was about 55%. And you can see that in the equation up here if you want to zoom in. Now, for those that go monthly, that jumped up to 71%. And so you see that it's a 1 to 444, 1 to 576, almost 77. Now, for us today, with 19% going to Mass every week, we have 1 to 415. When you include those that go to Mass once a month, that skyrocket, like it more than doubles to 1 to 855. So from these numbers, clearly there's a jump, not just today from those that go to Mass weekly to monthly, but also from the standpoint of in the 1970s to today, the ratio is bigger. And and that makes sense because our population has increased somewhat, at least in terms of like practicing Catholics. Kind of, because I don't want to say that completely because I can't, the numbers don't suggest that, but I mean, given the proportion and the total, Like we just have more priests or more people per priest. Like that's what's going on right now. Now this changes a little bit when you go to, like, if I were to switch this to just diocesan priests, and the reason why I would want to do that is for a variety of reasons. One, when you think of clumps of priests, like when you're talking about religious orders tend to have clumps of priests together, right? Like they're not, they either have like a parish and there's like 6 priests there, or like there's places in the state of Michigan that we have like that reflects this. And I'm sure most people know that as well, and wherever they are, like wherever a religious order is, there's typically more than one priest there. And so what that does is, in this comparison, is it creates a bias. When you have, like, say, for example, 11 priests or 7 priests, 7 or 11, doesn't matter. The point is that you have significantly more than 1 or 2 at a parish. That parish is going to have more help from the priests than, like, pretty much all diocesan parishes. And so not all of them, because there are cases where there is like 1 or, there is like 3 or 4 or 5. But like for most diocesan parishes, especially in the diocese that, requires priests to take control of 1 or 2, or I'm sorry, 2 or 3 parishes, which is currently happening. I'm actually, sorry, sticking to the facts. I don't want to like speculate anything right now, but like it's the, so like, there is a point that this number should probably be adjusted in some way. I just don't know a good way of doing that, because I don't think taking them away is appropriate completely, but I do think keeping them as a 1-for-1 does not reflect what diocesan priests, like diocesan priests deal with this more than religious priests. And that's just because of the nature of their situation. More people are going to be at a diocesan parish than at a religious orders parish. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I'm just
I don't like the idea of separating it, but this number in most diocesan parishes is way higher on average. Like that number is going to be way higher because the religious orders are bringing it down.
Yeah.
In a way that doesn't properly reflect a uniform.
I would also be interested to get ages, because I know that, like in East Texas, every priest was over 50, like bare minimum, maybe in their 60s. So it's like, how much of this is, because I know that there were priests that I dealt with that underserved their community just because they were in their 70s and they wouldn't let them retire, because there was nobody to take over. They would die as priests or a year after their priesthood, basically. Like they just get physically too sick to do anything.
So I just want to bring up Father John. I can confirm that there is more work to do than priests to do it, but I've met many priests who are not overworked because they just don't work very hard. Hello, also from South Louisiana.
Yeah.
So, but that's, I mean, like, yeah, like that's like our situation, right? Like we as the laity have to deal with that. And so like, I have a story that I've already talked about, but like in reference to not working very hard or being very diligent with like confession, for example. I'm not going to like rehash the whole thing here, but like I have witnessed that where the priest is neglectful of his duties, but at the same time, there is this aspect where like they are human, and if they're overworked, they have this like they do need to like visit people, or they're going to have a burnout, and that burnout can have a terrible influence on the congregation. And that was actually another aspect. Are you okay with this? Like, can I move on?
Yeah, no, go ahead. I'm responding to somebody in the comments.
Oh, sure, absolutely, go nuts with that. So there's a few things that have come out. So the first thing I'm going to do, where is it? Oh my gosh.
I figure you're talking to them as much as you're talking to me. It's just you're the stats guy, so I don't want to like.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Make my wild speculations as to why it is with my dumb headcanon.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So the burnout here is, I think, really important, because we're talking about priests and the distributions, and we see that like under 45 has a pretty big rate of burnout and a high rate of burnout, like for diocesan priests, whereas like religious priests, it starts off high and then it's like, I mean, they all start off high and then they simmer down, but like it seems to be constant with the religious priests, and then it like over 75, I don't know, maybe they retire or something. I actually, I can't tell you exactly why that happens over 75, um where it just drops, but it's the same thing here. Maybe they do retire, and that's just being reflected there. But let's see, the point here is that 45% of priests report at least one symptom of ministry burnout, and it's unevenly distributed, which means diocesan 50% and religious 33%, and only 9% exhibit severe burnout. And so this kind of reflects, at least from like what we've shown so far, that the diocesan would experience more burnout because they have more people to deal with. So that would make sense from reading this, why that would happen. There's just more people with the diocesan priest than it is for religious priest. Now that's not going to be the case for every individual, so I do want to like point out, like, anecdotes don't undermine like a general trend, but it is important to note that there are exceptions, right? So I don't want to pretend that if a religious person is, or I'm sorry, a religious priest is having some sort of burnout, to minimize that, because that's a serious thing for them as well. So I just want to, that's kind of like my asterisk note. So and then let's see, and then generally speaking, the I mean, this reflects in the average here, that 50 to 33%. So there's generally higher burnout with diocesan, and then there's lower burnout with religious. And so, and then there was another study that Kara did, that 1 out of every 20 priests were seriously thinking about leaving the priesthood. And let's see. Well, okay. Now I want to, yeah, 5% about whether they plan to remain a priest in the future. So like, I'm sorry, I want to clarify this. It says uncertain whether or not they would plan to remain a priest in the future if they were asked again to be a priest. And then there's another study. So this is a Kara study from 2019 and 2020. This is a study from the Priest magazine with Monsignor Stephen Rossetti, who is a psychologist and studies the Catholic priesthood. He said, one of the clear facts is that young priests are not actually leaving in large numbers. The best statistics assert that only between 10 and 12% actually leave. I don't know what he, like, large numbers is a subjective term, because I would say 10 to 12% is a large amount. But he does emphasize that this is significant considering the rate of marriage failures is much higher, which again, this is like a whataboutism argument. Like, I don't like that. When I pointed this out in the schools, the school studies, where they show, well, we show that our kids at Catholic private schools are have more faith when they're later in life. But it's like, you're comparing it to the public schools and you're not setting a standard. Like 36 to 25 is, yes, statistically significant, but is it practically significant? Which, as a statistician, is something like you're taught, like, just because it's statistically significant does not mean it's practically significant. It could just be that, okay, well, it's significantly different, but it doesn't actually do anything. It's just noticeable. And that some people can't quite understand that, but it's it is an important aspect when you're dealing with comparisons and you're using you don't have a standard to follow. and except for you're just doing better than the other guy. And I think that is a very weak standard.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
if you're better than, like, let's say like there's boxers in the world and you're better than the boxer in your hometown, like, great, you're great, you're better than that boxer in the hometown. You're still like second to last compared to the nation.
Right.
Because you're not comparing it in a way that is like, you're doing it strictly relative, and as opposed to setting up a gold standard to then evaluate based off of it. And that can be done in a variety of ways, but I'm not going to go into that here. But what I'm saying here is that 10 to 12 young priests leave, and that's pretty important when you have like 400 coming in every year.
Sure.
And it's like 40 of them leaving. Like, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Like, we need every priest that we can get. So, but yeah, so I guess that's all the information. Like, I know I just like threw a lot at you, but it's all about understanding the context. Burnout's a real thing. A priest suffered. I'm sorry, where is it? Priest burnout is a real thing, and priest burnout happens a lot because they're expected to do a lot of the actions a priest are expected to do, except for maybe being a person. And that's something I wanted to ask you about or talk to you about, because your experience is different from mine. But like, what I mean by that is, when it comes to being a person, when you look at these studies, a lot of them will point out, well, they're lonely, they don't get to engage socially with people, they're looked at as simply a dispenser of sacraments, not just from the people, but also from their bishop. And so, or at least they're treated in that way. And
Yeah.
so there's a human aspect that seems to, and it's not being satisfied for these priests in a very real way.
So I'm gonna, if I could just edit anecdote on the top of my screen, I would.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
Because this is all like my experience as a Catholic, maybe knowing 20 to 25 priests, maybe knowing 5 well, you know?
Yeah.
But okay, so generally speaking, in East Texas, where it was a Protestant run area, there was open anti-Catholic hatred. So that existed, where you would have issues with other Christian groups going, hey, if you're Catholic, you go to hell. You're demon worshipers, you're statue worshipers. The Pope's the Antichrist, yada, 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 yada. So you definitely run into that. I would have people, even like classroom teachers, try to convert me out of Catholicism. So I think that's very real. As it relates to priests, we had a pastor, and they would have this pastor's breakfast where a bunch of different pastors from different denominations would get together, and one would get up and speak. And a priest came in one time, I guess, invited by some of the other pastors, and he was booed and had things thrown at him till he left the stage. So anti-Catholicism is definitely a factor. Now, is that common throughout the United States? I don't know, but we saw it. I think
it certainly is at the Olympics.
Right. I think you have the sex abuse scandal. I mean, I don't think that can be understated as something that affects just the perception of priests generally.
Absolutely. And they probably get, I mean, it's not a cat call, but you know, they will say something, people will say something to them with the P word, right? Like
right,
out loud, and they won't be ashamed of actually calling another person they've never met that.
However, in Europe, this was a lot worse. Like, especially in Ireland, there have been priests that traveled that say when they go to Ireland, they don't dress in cassocks. They avoid it like the plague, because they'll get called out in the streets as, you know, the P word and all kinds of other stuff and whatever. So then so I think you have that. There are people that I knew that went into the seminary. This was in the Northeast, because I have a friend that lives out of Pennsylvania, and they're very ingrained in the more traditional Catholic communities there. Mm-hmm. And he knew some people on a first name basis that had gone into the seminary And because there was so much rampant homosexuality, he left because basically nobody followed the rules there. Nobody believed Catholic teachings about sexuality. There was predatory behavior, and so he
Right.
left.
Right. So like which seminary they go to actually matters.
Right. Oh, 100%. There's no question. And then I think the final thing though is just that, like, I think the priesthood has survived here in whatever, and I mean, you know, Father Brown in the comments probably knows better than me. But it just seems, I mean, like, making my point, there are priests in South Louisiana. In our comments section, we have a priest from South Louisiana. If you see it more often, it's real, you know, versus,
Right.
you know, the fact that as far as, and it aggravates me because I know priests that don't dress in their caskets, and I'll see them and I'm like, you're a priest, dude. Like,
Yeah.
just
Well, right,
throw it on. Like,
well, right. And because like I think there's a lack of, because like, and some people, like some priests seem to get really put off by that. They don't like that expectation, but it's like, man, like you are a visible sign of Christ's church walking among the people.
dude,
Like,
I would
like
get
I can't do that
workout
without
gear.
What?
Like I'm just like, I don't know. It's we had a priest, Monsignor Mouton, that would mow his grass in a full cassock. I mean, it was like, and it like looked absurd because he was so like elegant in it. It almost looked like he floated behind the lawnmower. But like, you know, it's just different. That's just it's a different culture. And you don't see, if priests are visible and people know them and they're decent human beings, then the priesthood doesn't fall apart. But if you never see priests ever, and then all you hear on the news is the sex abuse scandal, all you hear on the news is, you know, Count Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, you know, priests are either like murdering people or assaulting children, then like, you know.
So right, because like that's the thing that's counterintuitive for human beings. Like the idea that if you want to get over a stereotype, you need to actually engage more with the people who hold that stereotype. So
Right.
what you were saying, if you don't, that stereotype persists, and they're gonna just look at you and call you the P word because they don't see your humanity. They see you as someone who's in the church building, doesn't leave the church building, because if you did leave the church building, I'd see your collar or I'd see something. Because even though that's something that like that's kind of where culture comes into play, right? Like in the media, when a priest goes out in public in a movie, like the collar is worn or a cassock is worn, something is worn to signify that that is a priest. And they do that for two reasons. One, to show you in the movie, all right, this is the priest, he's easy to find, yada yada yada, but also because that really happened. Like that was a common thing that happened, and now it's not in some areas. Like in Michigan, like you'll see people in like I have a thing with Father Eric and I going to the bowling alley. Whenever we go to a public place, he's wearing his cassock. When he comes over, he wears his cassock. But it's like going bowling with a guy wearing his cassock, and then like I have a little short. It's like it's one of my most viewed videos on the channel, and the reason why I'm pointing that out is because he's just bowling for a little bit, and then at the end of it, he reveals that, oh yeah, a guy came up for confession, and he hadn't been to church in years, and the fact that he saw him in a cassock just convicted him to say, I need to get right with God, like literally right now.
Sure.
And so like that's what happened, because like there was a point where Father Eric just hey, this guy came up, he said he needed confession, we're gonna go someplace private and do confession, I'll come back and bowl the rest of my games or the rest of my game later. And I was like, okay, no problem. It was like and it was at like 11 p.m. at night. Like that's when we were bowling. And so I have a firsthand account of this happening. And I don't know, like it's just again promoting the idea of what you're saying is like
I think it's 100% real, and it's like Jonathan Rumi started playing Jesus in The Chosen, and it was like, and then he said people would come up to him and talk to him about like deeply personal issues because he's walking around looking like Jesus, and it's like,
Right.
I don't think that priests understand how important they are as a symbol and
Well,
what that,
some priests.
right. And there are some
Right.
that do, right? Of course, not all, but like,
Yeah.
it does a lot of good just to visibly set yourself apart in some meaningful way, and reclaim. It's almost like you're reclaiming the priesthood, right? It's kind of like, priest is like a dirty word since the sex abuse scandal. And it's like, no. We're reclaiming priesthood. This is
Right.
not what it means, etc. And I think a lot of priests want to hide. I remember Father Barron was saying, when the sex abuse scandal was going on, his mother would introduce him and say, "Oh, this is my son, the author." Because she wouldn't introduce him as a priest because it was embarrassing.
Right.
And I think if you're embarrassed, if you're embarrassed of your Christianity, if you're embarrassed of your faith, then like, how do you spread it?
Right. And you end up becoming feared into, you just end up becoming feared into a shell and you stay there. But like with the burnout, so like this is where, because just to go back to where the tangent started.
Sure.
Like the burnout is like, there's a very real problem with how we as the laity view our priests and how we don't, like, my camera's here, so like I just moved my thing to my second screen, so that's why I'm, anyways. So there's a very real problem with how we view our priests because too many of us do not engage with him outside of thanks Father, I appreciated you doing the mass. Like there's too much of a distance between the priest and the laity, and part of the burnout is the fact that they don't have like emotional support, like they don't have social support from the people that they engage with, from some of the studies I showed, like when you go into the details. And so it's a really important factor to not like treat your priest as, like, I don't want to say an idol, that's not what it, but a celebrity. So someone that's distant from you, that does something from afar, gives you something, like a celebrity gives you something, entertainment, right? So the priest is giving you the sacrament, not that it's equivalent to entertainment, that's not what I'm saying, but in terms of like the overall function of the two. And so there's this distance that happens. And so we need to close that distance, and we need to really look at priests as they're our spiritual fathers. Let's help them out with a bunch of things.
Well, and I think that priests too, I mean, it's funny because like some of the most honest interactions I've had in my life are with priests. I mean, obviously going to confession, but I remember, because like you get right, and this is a funny story, so I'll share it anecdotally because it's funny. It's like it's really funny. So when I started dating my wife, she went off to do the Disney college program, and I stayed home in South Louisiana. And she had a cat that my mom was going to keep. Now, the cat, one of my mom's cats got diagnosed with feline leukemia, which is basically like feline HIV. But her cat was immune to it for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And so my wife's cat starts sneezing. I don't realize that my wife's cat apparently has allergies. And so I go, oh gosh. And my mom said, oh, I made a mistake. We've given the cat feline leukemia. And I don't know how to tell this beautiful girl that I just started dating, which has now been my wife for 5 years, hey, we offered to keep your cat, but by the way, now it's going to die a slow and painful death. And so I couldn't get over to Texas. I had to go get the cat, go get it checked out, etc. But I was like, I just killed my new girlfriend's cat. This is going to destroy the whole relationship. This is horrible. And so I before driving to Texas, back to Texas to my mom's to get the cat, I went in to St. John's Cathedral in Lafayette, and I just prayed like fervently that this cat would not die because I was just so distraught over being like, hey, we tried to do this. Because my mom would have been burdened with the guilt. She's a guilty person. She would have been like, oh my gosh, I killed this animal. And there was a priest there. And I said, Father, can you pray with me that this cat is not dead? And him having like no context to the situation at all, just like me saying, hey, we might have accidentally killed my new girlfriend's cat and I might want to marry this woman. Prayed with me, and you could tell he was like, this is a little bit absurd, but it's like, whatever, right?
Right.
And I think that priests, because there are so many, like you said, a priest goes bowling and he hears a confession of somebody that hasn't dealt with it in decades. I didn't go to St. John's Cathedral. I just happened to be in the area and be begging God for the life of an animal. So like, it's just, you never know when people are in that vulnerable situation, and then how much a priest means to them, and then does it open that door to priesthood for them or for their family, or so on.
Right. No, absolutely, yeah.
Now, if he had been back in a rectory or wearing casual clothes, I never would have talked to him ever. The cat's alive, by the way. We hope it's run off somewhere, but it didn't die of feline leukemia. It didn't get it, so
at least not yet. I mean, not this.
Great.
All right, balloons. All right. Okay, so I think that's. Let's see. I think we've. 46 minutes. All right, so I think we've hit a pretty good spot. I do want to just emphasize one thing, unless you have one last thing to say.
No, I don't have any of the dumb animal stories to share.
Okay. All right. I do just want to emphasize this last point here. So, these numbers are probably under for diocesan priests, which most people work with and deal with when it comes to the sacraments, funerals, certain requests that go from blessing one's house to a number of things, including praying for an animal or some special request, that our priests do seem to be in a shortage compared to prior, like in 1970. And it's arguably, even in 1970, we didn't have enough priests then. And the reason why I say that is because it's one thing to get everything happening on the level of the diocese or on the level of the parish, where everyone's getting the sacraments, everyone knows Father, and there's actually a relationship that's building that reflects the spiritual patronage of the priest. But there's also the fact that there's we're in mission territory. Like, America is not a Catholic country, and we need to evangelize. And when you have a priest on the ground evangelizing with the laity, like, that does wonders. And right now we're barely trying to get by, simply because we don't have enough priests to do the sacraments, the sick visits, taking communion to someone who's sick is, now we have it where it's like, that used to be the priest or a deacon would do that. Now it's almost exclusively a layperson that's been designated by the priest for that person, or given permission by that person, because we don't have enough of either. And so we're only talking about priests, but I can't not reference the deacons because they're important in that aspect as well. But so it's just something to seriously think about whenever someone tries to say, they're not, we don't have a priest crisis. That doesn't seem to be what the evidence shows. And I think most of us have dealt with the consequences of that priest shortage. So, don't try to think that they're gaslighting you, I guess. Don't, that secular priest, when he said that, I don't think he was trying to gaslight anybody, but I do think that the context may be some context may be missing for him that he may not have looked at. And so so that was one of the inspirations for this video. The other inspiration is that I'm going to be going over a few things that will actually help with promoting the priesthood. I'm going to be going over some stats that will directly be helping the priesthood. From what we can gather so far, again, we don't have all these measurements in place, but they're rather important. And we are unfortunately, missing people to do all the tallies, right? Like, we have a priest shortage. Like, don't expect a bunch of measurements to be accurately done, simply because there's a lot to still do for that priest or whoever's working at that parish. So I will be going over that, and I will be looking to send that to bishops, because even though they get a report from CARA, a lot of them do get a report from CARA, especially those in the archdiocese. You could look that up. There's a report that archdioceses get. It's about 775 pages. I did not look through it all, but I looked through a lot of it, and pinpointing and interpreting in a positive direction is, I think, something that needs to happen. CARA does a great job, but there are certain things that are incredibly obvious from the data that is not being enacted in the different dioceses, and that there's it's kind of weird that it's not happening. Like, because if we have a priest crisis, you would expect that to happen. And so I'm going to be pointing that out. I'm not going to be like dunking on the bishops. That is not the intent of that video. I wouldn't do that anyway. But the point of that video is to share it, let as many people know it as possible, but also I am personally going to be sending them to the bishops, because I do think that is an insight that matters. And, and just to let you know, I'm not just some random person who has a theology degree who's saying something on a podcast. I do not have a theology degree. I am an expert statistician. I have a master's degree in statistics. I work as my day job as a statistician, and I'm using my talents to help the church. And so it's not something I'm bragging about. I do need to justify why I think I can do this, because some people are just like, you don't know what you're talking about, whatever. So that's why I'm stating this. But like, that was a long outro, but basically like that was the, that was part of the inspiration for doing this, is to show that, we do in fact have a crisis, and we need to deal with that ASAP. So that was it. So
I am a random guy. I'm a Catholic that made a tabletop game.
Oh yeah, and that's
if you're for you to bounce stuff off of.
Well, no, but like we've had plenty of talks, and those talks have been, we've talked about this at length.
Sure.
In other ways. So I thought bringing you on would be good, because you knew the context, and you're a smart guy, and you're my friend. So, okay, I will let everyone go. Oh, great work on this video. There you go. You got thanks, John.
Cool.
Thank you, Father John. I appreciate it. All right. So I think that's a great way to end the video. So thank you guys for joining, and enjoy your weekend. Oh, and share the video and like it if you haven't already done it. But all right, enjoy your weekend. Bye.